open my eyes.
This is a conversation with Dimis Michaelides, a world-renowned keynote speaker, author, and a consultant known for his expertise in creativity, innovation, and leadership. In addition, Dimis is a world-class magician, which makes him one of a kind. Dimis, welcome to the show.
Thank you for your kind words, Philippos.
I'm really pleased that we have such a diversely experienced person to join us in this new journey with the Marvel Talks podcast. And if you allow me to make a segue into the conversation, Dimis, with your broad experience across multiple industries and general management, finance, and marketing, what really interests me is how you have shifted specifically in the direction of innovation, creativity, and leadership. Can you share a few thoughts on what beckoned to you down your journey?
Well, I spent 25 years in organizations, mostly large organizations, and mostly outside of Cyprus, in France and in Washington, D.C. And the time, I believe, had come for me to see the world from outside those organizations. So I decided to change things when I was in the latter half of my 40s. And I decided to work on creativity and innovation, which were subjects that always fascinated me. In fact, in my first job, when I was in my 20s, I was responsible for what was called in the company then, this was in Paris, Cercle de Progrès. And this was essentially a group that was dedicated to generating and implementing new ideas in the company.
That's fantastic. And you mentioned the word change, and I understand that the word change goes hand in hand with creativity and innovation. Is all change necessary?
I don't know if it's necessary. There's good change and there's bad change. And some change is good for some people and bad for other people. The exactly same type of change. I believe change is necessary. That's what makes progress. And as you said, by definition, creativity and innovation are doing new things. If you're doing new things, you are changing something. Maybe it's big innovation, so you're making big changes, or it's a small innovation and you have to make small changes. But change has to happen. Now, whether the outcome of the change is always good, no, it can be very bad. Unfortunately, creativity and innovation have also been directed to destructive causes and even criminal causes. But even innovation that we would call wow, very beneficial, may not be beneficial for some people. It may lead, for example, if you have a new product which is competing against an old product, it's not so good for those who are working on the old product. Or if you have a new way of production, which is great in increasing profit, it may not be great for the benefit and welfare of the people who are working in the organization. So there's both sides to it, Philippos.
And you mentioned before we went live the atom bomb as well. So a miraculously advanced technological leap which gave change and innovation, but it gave us the atom bomb as well.
Yeah, well, there's nuclear technology, which is fantastically useful in many ways, and it can also be fantastically destructive. The technology, in the sense of the know-how, is pretty neutral, but the way it is used by humans is not, because we are human.
What is the main difference between creativity and innovation as concepts?
Okay, they're very close. Um, in a nutshell, I would describe creativity as imagining something new and making it happen. It's not just the imagination. You also have to make it happen. So there's action in creativity. And innovation is new things, making new things happen. But the idea of value comes into it as well. So they're new things of value. Now, the questions arise, how new? And value for whom, and how do we measure it? And these are big questions. But if we have something new that is implemented, that it's there, it's action and it's value, and it brings value to somebody, then that is what I would define as innovation in a generic sense.
So if we make it a three-step sequence, we have imagination, where
Absolutely.
we imagine or we generate an idea or a new idea, or we formulate a vision from A to B. Right. Then creativity is the imagined vision enacted. So we add action to the imagination.
Exactly.
And innovation is enacted imagination with a specific value production.
Exactly. There's a value proposition in every innovation.
And within organizations, and talking about change, which either implement an innovative new procedure or system, or a new way of doing things, or we recalibrate the direction of the organization, whether to a small or a large extent, there are people who are less inclined to align with change. Is this correct?
Absolutely.
And one of the main puzzles of leadership, I suppose, is how to solve the puzzle of change resistance.
Yes.
Why is change so difficult within organizations?
Okay. I think there are a number of reasons. There are some objective reasons, and the objective reasons are, well, there might be less people in whatever new structure we have imagined for that organization. Also, there would be people will have different roles. That makes people nervous. There is a fear of the unknown. And it makes some people more nervous than others, because some people are, let me say, less comfortable navigating the unknown than other people. But there are objective reasons as well. There might be change which obliges you to move to a different city, a different geographical area, or which places you in a completely different chain of command, which is something that all organizations have. And I think it's this uncertainty that causes the difficulty. Now, if I can share a story, can I share a story?
Feel free.
When I was in my early 30s, I was managing an international company. I was managing the French operation of the company, and for the first time for that company, we were implementing a major reorganization. In the jargon of the time, it was called re-engineering. So, and it was something that would definitely add value to the company, but it meant quite a lot of changes in the way everybody worked. And when I was CEO of that organization, which was about 180 people, and we had to we reduced it down to about 120, 130. And remember, this is an organization that had never had such change before. We presented the plan as openly as possible. I sensed all that nervousness, especially in the period when people were very uncertain. And then when we'd announced everything, when things were more, when a dialogue had begun, all the objections I got were all subjective. They all had to do with feelings. There was not a single one that said, well, if we do this, it will be better for our clients. Or if we do that, it will be better for the organization. And it's dealing with this subjective part of the organization that I think is the most difficult thing in implementing change. And I'm talking about change in existing organizations, not startups.
Basically, emotion trumps reason in such cases, in the sense that you have the people who are concerned that their day-to-day routine or expectations or predictability will be disrupted by the change. And this leads to them closing and contracting emotionally to an extent that they are not receptive to the reasons and the logical justification of why the change is necessary.
Yeah.
Which makes it more a psychological project than a communicative project, perhaps in part.
In part, yes. There are objective reasons when people really feel that the change is clearly disadvantageous for them. The most clear example be when they are fired, when the organization, let's put it in modern terms, downsizes.
Which is change as well.
Change as well, exactly.
And this comes in waves as well. So you may have a wave of downsizing, and the existing people who remain, then they may be expecting or fearing that they will be included in the next wave, even though there is no plan for them to be included in the downsizing as well. So you create ripples of uncertainty and pockets of anxiety, perhaps.
Yeah, yes, it's possible to do that, but it is also possible with good leadership to bring, to instill a sense of confidence, but not confidence in an organization that will now, from now on, always be the same. Confidence in we are navigating change, and we will successfully navigate through change, and be part of it.
So perhaps good leadership then can be a valid antidote to resistance.
Good leadership is very useful, especially in times of change. In fact, there's a lot of literature for the past about 30 years or more. There has been a distinction between management and leadership in business. It didn't exist about 50 years ago, but now there's a distinction. And yes, there's a number of differences. I think the most important one is that the leader is the manager who is navigating change. And a good leader is somebody who is navigating change successfully, well. In other words, he or she is taking people into territories which are unknown, not only to those people, but to themselves as well, to the leaders themselves.
So perhaps in that context, the fundamental difference between the manager and the leader is that the leader must necessarily take the people on board and take their emotions and the subjective landscape into account when implementing the leadership plan and actually facilitating the change.
Yes.
Which makes it a much more difficult role than the mere management of expectations and of mathematical formulas that are involved in managing an organization, I suppose.
Well, it is more complex, especially when you're talking about organizations with people who already have a certain knowledge of expertise or education or know-how, and we really are concerned about their happiness and their well-being at work for a number of reasons. One of them being the callous one: if they're happy, they'll work better for us. But the other one is, well, if they're happy, we work in an atmosphere of smiling faces, and it's good for us as well.
That's fantastic, Ed. Employees' happiness and engagement is a great segue for me to mention your wonderful book, The Art of Innovation, where you basically introduce a model that's a very interesting model for how organizations can actually implement meaningful change and innovation, which I have the book here. I acquired it from you a few years ago, and I reminded myself of the key concepts yesterday in preparing for this podcast. So in this book, which basically also became part of your interventions when training organizations, introduces a model that has the sources, the structure, and the culture of an innovative organization. And part of the culture, precisely one of the 5 tenets of the culture as a driver of innovation, is engagement.
Absolutely.
So
you read it well.
Thank you. So could you share a few thoughts about this model on a high level, because it's a very interesting and fascinating model?
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words about my book. It's basically about innovation in existing organizations. And it's important to make the decision because startups can be very innovative. Mm-hmm. They can be. They're not necessarily, every startup is not very innovative, but the most successful ones usually are. But the challenges, the innovation challenges facing the startup are completely different from the ones that are facing the existing organization. Organizations will, even existing organizations, will innovate in many different ways. Innovation in IBM is not the same as innovation in Tesla or Honda or whatever. And they're all innovative companies. Mm-hmm. Now, even though their innovation is different, I believe there are certain elements that you quoted one of them, certain elements that are common to all organizations that are innovative. The first one, the sources, is basically talent, energy, and method. And talent and energy is your people, the know-how of your people, and how much they're giving to the organization. And method is a little bit is the little know-how you need to make your creativity efficient.
Can we touch a bit on the method? It's a very interesting part of the model.
Sure. Creativity became structured, methodologically structured in the 20th century, basically. Early on by people like Poincaré, Raymond Poincaré in France, Wallace, who was, I believe, the director of the London School of Economics, and we're talking about the 1920s or 30s. And then in the 50s, Osborne and Barnes, Osborne being the father of brainstorming, or the first person who coined the term and published it. And they argued that for every that creative problem solving has to be done in stages, and at each stage you have to practice divergent thinking and critical thinking. Let's call it creative thinking and critical thinking. I'm sorry, they use the words divergent thinking and convergent thinking. I prefer to use creative and critical thinking.
Yep.
And you need them both to have an outcome. And it is useful to do things in stages, a preparatory stage, an actual brainstorming stage, and then a how to do it stage. So let's say at least 3 stages. That's the methodology. If you use it, especially if you're in a group or team or company, your creativity becomes more efficient than simply saying, oh, let's generate ideas, or let's do the next action plan or whatever.
So basically, the method serves as a way to harness the, let's say, the chaos of imaginative fluidity and ideation and the generation of multiple ideas in multiple directions, to harness that energy, that creative energy, into specific realizable and viable actions, creative actions.
Right. If you take creative thinking, Osborne and Barnes had 4 guidelines. First is suspend judgment. Don't judge. The second is quantity. We can get, if you need a lot of ideas to find one good idea. Beyond reason, it means really stretch your mind beyond what is logical, in inverted commas, and build on ideas that exist. Once you've done that, you have lists of ideas, some of which may be good.
So quantity then.
Yes, quantity is important. But then all you have is lists. So there's a point where you have to start, first of all, sorting these out, organizing your ideas, then evaluating them, and judgment comes back here. Here we're back to critical thinking. We're back to Platon, Aristoteles, Descartes, and all that, and the empiricism, whatever. And then we choose. You have to make a choice. You evaluate, you prioritize, and choose. If you don't choose, you don't move on. Okay, so the advice about Osborne and Barnes, Osborne and Barnes, is don't practice the two together. Do the creative thinking first, and then the critical thinking. If you do them both, then you're creating a muddle, especially when you're trying to do this as a team or in a group. But I find it works as well on a personal level.
So let's say, to get a bit practical, that you are an organization who wants to improve customer service, and you gather a team of people to brainstorm. And then you pose a question, which is, how can we dramatically improve customer satisfaction? So that's the prompt or the cue for the brainstorming. Right? You invite people then to generate multiple ideas, even beyond reason, which means we don't care about budget, we don't care about implementability, and we become we focus on quantity of ideas, and then we come up with all sorts of ideas: improve service, replace the website, build a club in the organization, take people out for dinners, for lunch, so you create a list of ideas which then have to be harnessed through the critical stage of the brainstorming session into those ideas which meet specific criteria. Is it a valid summary of an imaginative brainstorming session?
It is.
And some of the criteria can be, for example, budget.
Yes.
So viability,
Exactly.
relevance.
Yes.
What else?
Well, you actually summed them up with the word budget and relevance.
Okay.
It's basically value.
Value.
Value, feasibility. I would add another one, originality.
Okay.
Not that we want originality for originality's sake, but if we get an idea that is quite original and we're in a competitive environment, you're less likely to be copied quickly. You will be copied eventually if it's really good, but it won't be so quick if it's a little bit way out.
So originality will give you an edge.
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay. All right. So that goes to the method part of the sources
Right.
of the model in the art of innovation. So we
Right.
have energy, talent, method, which is the sources of innovation.
Right.
Then we have structure, which I understand is the organizational context in which these innovative interventions can take place.
Right.
And structure is, so the sources are represented by a triangle.
Right.
And the three elements, and then the four elements of structure are individual, team, target, and system.
Yeah. So two of them,
Sure.
as you can see, are human. The organization has to accept individuals and the importance of individuals in the organization, has to be able to get their individuals to work well in teams. And then the non-human, the more abstract part is target, which is the objectives, because your innovation is there to serve certain objectives. It's not innovation. It's not being new just for the sake of being new. And then system, which is the organized way in which you make all these happen. And there are hundreds of different systems that can deliver innovation in organizations. So that's what I call structure. And then and they're represented by a square. By the way, there is one painting for each one of these elements by one of the best artists we have in Cyprus, E22, who did all the artwork for the book. And then finally, there's a pentagon. The pentagon is culture, and culture is all about ideas, freedom. No organization is absolutely free, but more freedom is better than less freedom if you want innovation. Engagement, which you emphasized before, and then humor and risk. Like it or not, something's going to change. There's going to be a risk, a small risk or a big risk. You have to be ready to take a risk. It doesn't mean you're ready to do anything which might completely destroy your company or organization, but you cannot do it without a risk. And remember, not doing anything, not innovating, is also a risk.
As a person who served on boards across different continents, have you seen how cultures differ in the context of their propensity to accept or resist change? So are some countries, let's say, or cultures or societies more disinclined to change, more disinclined to be progressive, whether in the context of their working environments or of their societal traditions? Is resistance to change a cultural thing as well, perhaps, in your experience?
It is definitely a cultural thing, but let's think of what of how we're defining culture as well. Yes, if there is a culture that is open to change, it's more likely to be innovative than a culture that is not open to change for whatever reasons. About 50 years ago, China was considered a traditional culture which underwent an immense change, a violent change, into communism. Now it is in many ways a capitalist economy with a different role of the state, still preserving traditional values, but there is no way you will call China a traditional country today in the way you might have done about 50 years ago. So change is possible in that kind of big cultural context. But there is another. When I was working at the World Bank, which I did for about 7 years in the 80s, people, friends of mine, would ask me and say, there are 160 people from 160 or 170 different countries in this organization. How do you get along with such big cultural differences? And my response to them, when I thought this through, because I mean that's how it was. I had people from America, the Americas, from Europe, from Africa, from all the countries of Asia. But my response was, well, in the World Bank, or at least at the time, and I'm not sure it's changed that much, this part has changed, there are not 160 different cultures. There are 3 different cultures. Economists, engineers, and lawyers, basically. And I remember I came from the economist stream of knowledge, if you like, and we always had arguments with the engineers and we always had arguments with the lawyers. And among ourselves as economists, we were more likely to agree. So culture comes in also as a profession. And there is a civil service type of culture, which is, for a number of reasons, less responsive to change wherever you are. However, I hasten to add, there are public organizations and governments in some countries that innovate much more than others. So I'm a little bit careful of the term culture, but it's very, very, very important for change. And it's not necessarily national.
It could get national, at least in part, perhaps, depending also on the geography of a location. Like in Cyprus, for example, we are an island, and for as much as we can recall, we were cut off from the rest of the world, which perhaps led to the traditional sentiment and the traditional propensity of the people, and perhaps also the increased importance of the church and religion. And in part, one could argue that the tradition of the society or the culture, and to what extent it was cut off from information coming from different societies and civilizations and religions and cultures, that isolation from the rest of the world, for as long as it lasted, because now we are all connected through the internet, through the social media, and through the interconnectedness of the world, that perhaps led to, let's say, the Cypriot society becoming more resistant to information and challenges and diverse viewpoints coming from abroad. So that's a hypothesis of mine. So perhaps even geography and whether or not a location is isolated or not from the rest of the world, thus less exposed to information of other cultures, that perhaps could also be correlated with the subjectivity of the people resisting to the new. So the same idea of the people in the workplace having subjective reasons to object to change. Perhaps if you see it on a nationwide level, perhaps the people of a country could be resistant to accept new people or new ideas or new information could precisely be linked to the fact that the place like Cyprus was isolated from the rest of the world. So that's what do you think about that? Is it a valid proposition?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I really am not sure.
Mhm.
And here's what Cyprus has always, for millennia, Cyprus has never been the center of a big, powerful state or empire. It's always been at the fringes of some other empire, whether that be the
Venetians,
Romans and then Byzantines and Venetians and Ottomans and British Empire. So I believe these have brought influences into Cyprus. The fact that we are insular, that we are an island, I think would make the ideas that come from the centers of these slower to be absorbed here. However, don't forget that Cypriots, at least now, they travel quite a lot.
Yeah.
They travel a lot. And there are Cypriot communities in so many places around the world that they would also bring in new ideas. I believe that the biggest barrier is of course cultural, but is set there for political and structural reasons. We do not have a set of politicians who are ready to create big change, the kind of big change we need to become a small. We will always be small, so there are there will be limits, certain limits to what we do. But then being small also gives you advantages. Have we exploited them well in the past 10, 20, 30 years? I think not. And my wish is that our future politicians, the future ones in power, will take this much more at heart. I see a few beginnings. I see a few beginnings, but also many things that are very disappointing in this point of view. Let me be open as well.
Sure.
We had a national policy of enriching ourselves by selling passports, okay, and building cement buildings to go along with it and enable the sale of our passports. That is not a development policy. It's something that can probably get you out of trouble when you're in trouble, which we were when this started, but it's not a long-term sustainable development policy, and it is certainly not conducive to innovation. It's conducive to building a state and a status quo of certain privileged people enriching themselves.
So it's not an innovative endeavor which offers long-term added value to the country, if I hear you well, but it's something that it's a pop-up, an opportunistic pop-up or business that was made perhaps in the aftermath of, let's say, the credit crunch or the bail-in, and which led to the well-known consequences of our problems with Europe, and which led us to cancel the problem. So that doesn't qualify as an innovative, as a valid innovative enterprise on a national level. Is it correct?
I agree, and I love the words you use. An opportunistic pop-up policy. That's exactly what it was.
Dimis, I'll segue into the personal aspect now, and I'll come back to that when we wrap up the discussion, because we also have a few points on this direction. Outside of your professional life, I know that you pursue passions which include magic and music.
Yes.
Can you share with us what it is that you love about? Let's start with magic first. What it is that beckon to you when you start doing magic, I presume, in a very early age? What is it about magic that you love?
It actually was not at a very early age.
Okay.
I started practicing magic when I was in my very early 30s. Many magicians start when they're 10 years old or even younger than that. I was a pretty mature person when I started doing magic, but I was attracted to the art and the craft of magic, which is making the impossible possible. May I link it to creativity?
Of course, I was going to ask you about it.
Well, here's how it links, and I think it's a very strong link. Magic, and I'm talking about magic as presenting a magical show. I'm not talking about the occult.
So a conjurer's world.
Yeah, I'm talking about magic as entertainment through deception, by using deception. What is beautiful about it, and this is in fact the heart of creativity as well, is magic entails a breakdown between cause and effect. So if something vanishes before your eyes, there's an effect and you don't know the cause, right?
Yep.
Or if this pen suddenly vanishes and it appears under the table over here, then that's a transposition. Or if I manage to read your mind, it's something where you cannot link cause and effect. The spectator cannot. However, the magician will necessarily do the logical thinking that has to be done to make that thing happen without the spectator understanding what happens. So there is a very creative part, imagining the completely impossible, unrealistic, amazing, if you like, surprising, and then inventing a way of making it happen. And I think there's a very strong link to creativity that way, and that's part of my fascination in magic. And in most of my magical presentations, I use my own scripts and my own approach to what amazing thing is happening on stage or close up or whatever I'm performing.
One of the most popular quotes I've read, and I am not quite sure who said it, is that magic is the most honest of deceptions. You promise you will deceive people and you go and deceive them.
Right. Magic is the only absolutely honest profession.
Yep.
The magician promises to deceive and does so.
That's the accurate one.
Yeah, it's a guy called, it was a magician at the turn of the 20th century called Carl Germain, who was also a lawyer from the US. It is very honest because you expect me to deceive you if I'm a good magician, and I do it. And that's honest.
Yep, please go on.
As opposed to the con artist, as opposed to the people who are gathering, communicating with spirits and things like that.
That's really interesting because the very fact that people that witness a magic effect, like your latest show that I will mention in a moment, so because the person, the spectator, is promised a deceiving act or a deceptive, entertaining act, that's precisely why they do not get upset by having their worldview completely disrupted. Because what you actually do when you perform magic is that you basically disrupt the common perceptual structure of the spectator, which can be quite upsetting. Because if the whole of my life, I know that this pen cannot dematerialize. So that goes at the very core of my beliefs. Cause and effect, as you said,
Exactly.
goes at the core of our psychological constitution. So when a magician makes a pen disappear, he disrupts your most fundamental presumptions about life.
Right.
Newtonian physics, basically.
Right, yeah.
So the very fact that you announce from the beginning that the person will see a disruption of their common perceptual patterns, if that's a correct choice of words, alleviates the emotional distress that that person would otherwise feel if the magic was performed in a vacuum. And perhaps I can link that to the leadership discussion we had before, in the idea that because change is disruptive, if the leaders are able to communicate and to articulate the context in a compelling, empathetic, and appropriate manner, I'm drawing parallels here, then perhaps the distress that the employees, let's say, will feel because of the disruption that the change will cause to their subjective experience can be alleviated.
It can definitely be alleviated. And we can definitely help those people, if we go back to the beginning, who are less comfortable with change, start to become more comfortable with change. And we are doing them a service if we do that. Because whether we like it or not, change is going to happen. It's been very fast in the past 20 years. I do not see it getting any slower. And it will disrupt us as it does whether we like it or not. So getting used to it is a good thing for everybody.
So context is key.
Absolutely.
In your last show that I happily attended, called It Is Magic, but Is It Art?, which was staged in Limassol, Nicosia, and importantly in the Edinburgh Fringe Festival.
Right, yeah.
And which was awarded with 4 stars by the British Theatre Guide, I witnessed something really spectacular, which was Dimis, whom I know for several years, I believe delivering one of the most mature, meaningful, and engaging performances I have ever witnessed. What is the aftertaste of your experience, and how do you feel after having been positively appraised by the British Theatre Guide, having presented in such a competitive festival of arts, being the Edinburgh Fringe Festival?
Well, you're right. There are about 3,000 different shows at the Edinburgh Fringe. And thank you for attending my show. I'm happy about it because it's my conception. I wrote and performed the show. I did have a director and a producer and a creative consultant, but the whole idea was, and I believe an important premise, is not for the magician to go and say, I'm going to fool you. Let's make it clear, we have to deceive people. Otherwise, we're not magicians. But if all I am doing is showing whatever power I have over you, which is knowing and being able to do something secret, then it's not really interesting. And my whole subject was, it's magic, but is it art? Which is really 3 questions. What is art? What is magic? Is magic art? And I took the view, which many art critics take, that art was, in the age of Platon, it was mimesis, imitation, right through the Renaissance and until the beginnings of the 20th century or end of the 19th, it was mimesis. At
Imitation.
least, yeah, imitation. But from then on, it became I like to use an art philosopher's words, Arthur Danto's words, embodied meaning. So it takes completely different forms. It's no longer even painting or sculpture, not necessarily. Okay, and so this evolution in the definition of art then brings us to, is magic art? And I believe magic is not necessarily art by today's definition. It definitely is mimesis, which means it's a craft. It's something you have to do well, but you have to say something. You have to have some meaning that is beyond "I fooled you," and that makes people think. And it makes people think beyond how did they do it. And if you're communicating that in your magic, you can make it very engaging, very engrossing. People can connect emotionally. And then your magic can become art. But only then. Otherwise, it's magic.
You have mentioned engrossment and engagement.
Yeah.
And this gives me a link to the next point. I know that you are acquainted with the great late Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, the psychologist who popularized the concept of flow or the optimal experience. First of all, can you tell us in a few words what is the optimal experience of flow and how does that link to creativity?
Well, I had the honor of presenting Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi in a creativity conference about 10 years ago in Portugal. And in his view, happiness in terms of engagement, because happiness can mean other things as well, is basically what he discovered after what I would call long-term studies. Basically, he would page people at the time of pagers and say at random times and say, what are you doing now? And how happy do you feel? These two questions on a scale of 1 to 10. And his conclusions came that people are most engaged when they are doing something they love and they are good at it and it has a challenge. They're doing something new. So if it's basketball, it's trying to shoot a basket from farther away or playing with a more difficult team, etc. That's when people feel most engaged. And he called that state a state of flow.
In the zone.
In the zone. And what is the link with creativity? He then wrote, after having studied and published a lot on flow, he published a couple of books on creativity in which he argued that what we call big C creativity, we're all creative, but some people make really big and important new contributions to the sciences or the arts or to knowledge. So big new contributions to knowledge or the discovery of even new fields of knowledge or practice. Big C creativity involves flow. Those who are very big C creatives, if you like, they love what they do, they are good at what they do, and they're constantly looking at a challenge, trying to get better at what they do.
I think the key word that you mentioned is the new. So you love what you do, but at the same time, you have one foot in the unknown.
Exactly.
And this is perhaps what keeps you engaged and alert. Because if you remain within the cabinet of the known, of what you've always knew, which is a comfort zone of the predictable, then perhaps you will not have this alertness which is offered by encroaching into what you don't know, because where you in the unknown, going back to what you mentioned in the change discussion, in the unknown looms often anxiety, but excitement as well. So in the unknown lie dangers, but also treasures.
Exactly.
So if you are doing what you love, but at the same time you are brave enough to venture into new territory, this perhaps can hopefully not terrify you, but in small doses of encroachment that can keep you motivated and engaged. And it's a path towards growth and flourishing as well. Is it a valid proposition?
Yes, it is.
So inevitably, since you are in the known, since you are encroaching in the unknown and you are trying out something new, this by itself can qualify as a creative endeavor because you are venturing into the new.
Yes, and there is uncertainty, there is risk, there is failure, and there is actual failure. Most creatives actually fail. Sometimes they fail many times, but they enjoy it. And can you imagine Picasso waking up one day and saying, "Oh, darn, I have to do another painting today," or Einstein saying, "Oh, I have to work on that equation again," and not liking it. Of course not. They love what they're doing. And they don't always get it right. And you're right. They are navigating uncertainty, new things. And that is what brings together flow and creativity.
That's
fantastic. That's a great insight from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi.
Closing the loop and going back to the discussion on some of the most difficult aspects of change and innovation. Dimis, during one of our recent talks, you expressed some concerns with some of the perils or the negative aspects of technology and innovation. Could you share a few thoughts on this aspect? This also touches on welfare and how technology affects positively or negatively welfare.
Yeah. As I said before, creativity can be used in very negative and very positive ways. And what is technology? Technology is basically a know-how, and it embodies political relations as well. It is of necessity in some ways, in many ways. It is of necessity political. And the more powerful will express themselves more and get what they want to be done more easier than the less, let's say, powerful. And there are a lot of things that concern me. I won't even try to enter the area of artificial intelligence because AI is a black box for everybody, including the AI experts, by the way.
Indeed.
But a new technology can also be, I mentioned at the beginning, it can be very positive because it brings us new things. So, for consumer goods, well, we have a new iPad, we have the iPhone. Imagine what we can do with the iPhone. We're having a good time. Poor fishermen in the west of Africa are lucky because they have an iPhone, because they can find out what the prices are in different fish markets and find the one that is more advantageous for them. For example, I'm giving you a small example of the use of a mobile phone, basically. But then there are some more sinister aspects, and one of them, only one of them. There are many aspects I don't like about this. One of them is in ways of working. About a century ago, there was a guy called Frederick Taylor who was a father of scientific management, and he believed that there were two types of people, managers and workers, and managers would design the jobs and make them as efficient as possible, and they would measure every single hand movement and time, and they were called time and motion studies. And this is what enabled, famously, Henry Ford to produce a car that was much, much cheaper than all other cars, to make the car accessible to everybody. But it was also a world which was dehumanizing to workers, who were measured on every single movement of their body. It was stressful. It was extremely individualistic. And over the years, we had, let's call it, a more Japanese way of working, or Toyota type of working, in which people work in autonomous teams, they make decisions themselves, etc. Now, unfortunately, we discover that companies like Amazon have gone back to Taylorism in a far more sinister form, in the sense that it's Taylorism. They design the jobs they want. They're not pleasant jobs. I'm talking about their warehouse jobs. And they have eyes that are watching the workers. And workers have 15 minutes of toilet break per day. And all this is noted down. It comes out in their statistics. It's reasons for hiring or firing people. I find this absolutely horrible. And I think it is also very regressive. On the one hand, this makes billionaires and that very small elite that is ultra rich. On the other hand, it is dehumanizing for workers. And that is just one example, which is actually very well described in a book by Kate Crawford called The Atlas of AI. So technology in itself is not necessarily positive for everybody. I'm very sad about that. I believe that one day politically we will be able to do something about this too, because the extreme inequality in which we are living today is basically an outcome of a capitalist system that is not conducive to progress in the long term.
So at the end of the day, just to offer a summarizing thought, technology is a tool in the hands of conscious agents, and in part, it all boils down to how people will use it and what type of people will use it, and whether the people who will be using it have a value constitution and a character which is of a benevolent direction, or a character and an intention which can be sinister or selfish or greedy. So at the end of the day, technology itself is not good or bad, but it is a tool in the hands of good or bad people, or a tool in the hands of people who are either motivated by benevolent or sinister intentions. Is it a valid proposition?
It is, and I would add, it's not just the people, it's the systems they're working in.
Okay.
And what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. We're also living in a world where Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are the big heroes. Well, all of these people have made a lot of their fortunes by using public money. I mean, I think about 5 out of 7 of the major technologies embodied in the iPhone were produced by government. So let's put things into perspective. It is wrong to idolize these people. It is good to give them respect, offer them respect for the things they did. And it is also good to fight against the fact that they have an incommensurate amount of power.
So it's always conversations, whether in terms of change, innovation, and progress, and what each of these terms means are always nuanced, and they are not black and white. And this leads me to the end of the episode. I sincerely wish that more people will channel their creative energy into inspiring and captivating endeavors like magic, like benevolent creativity and innovation. And you are one of the people that I truly wanted to invite in this show because I have deep inspiration and admiration for what you do. And you have also helped me when I started a new chapter of my career. So thank you, first of all, for your friendship. Thank you for being part of this show, and keep doing what you do and enchanting people with your talents, your hard work, and with your determination, Dimis.
Well, if I may say, thank you too for inviting me to your show and letting me express myself. And thank you as well for the work you're doing. I love your book. You know that.
Of course. Thank you, Dimis. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Philippos.
Is this another game of my mind? I'm wide awake. I hear my name. I turn around, there's no one again. I won't forget the day she left. Slammed the door and